introduce you to another person who does not need introduction, but I do need you to understand exactly why it was so important to Mayor Turner and all of us to have Councilmember Tiffany Thomas be our moderator for today. As Houston City Council member for District D, I know, and the D for Deshelle, and I so apologize that and you know, it's so good that Councilmember Evans Shabazz has gone on to her airplane so that she did not get that. We're going to eliminate that from the tape. But anyway, District F, she has helped revitalize neighborhoods and partnered with corporations and nonprofits to solve community issues and has inspired future generations of civic leaders to get involved. Councilmember Thomas is a product of the local school system and a lifelong public servant representing Houston's most diverse part of town. She, like Mayor Turner, lives in a complete community, grew up in a complete community, as well as I did. Fort Bend, Houston for me, Alief for her. After serving a term as Alief ISD trustee, position 7, she was elected to Houston City Council in 2019 as the first Black woman and person under 40 to serve in this role. She proudly serves Alief, West Chase, Tanglewild, Briar Meadow, Westmount, and the historic Piney Point communities. As chair of Housing and Community Affairs for the city, Councilmember Thomas oversees priorities related to housing, veteran affairs, homelessness, and solid waste. She remains focused on improving the lives of Houstonians by making a lasting impact on the quality of life for all of its residents. Councilmember Thomas, if you'll please join us, as well as our directors from the Mayor's offices, the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs, Nicole Irvin, Houston Public Works Director, Carol Haddock, and Parks and Recreation Director, Kenneth Allen. And while they get themselves seated, Councilmember Thomas, I did want to acknowledge that our major champion of his work alongside Mayor Turner has been and continues to be Chief of Staff Marmalette Hunter. Thank you so much for being here, Chief of Staff.
Good morning, everyone. So it's hard to come behind Mayor Turner and then also our Ann Potter. That was very tough, but I'm gonna see if I can hold my weight this morning. Before I get started, and thank you so much for reading my bio, I just want to share with all of you in this room that I don't just come to this work as a council member, but I come to this work as a scholar and a practitioner, as an assistant professor of community development at Prairie View A&M University. Prairie View is the only historically Black college with the academic community development program and the only institution in Texas with this program, noted as one of the oldest in the nation. So I come to this work and this conversation with this beyond passion but expertise. And I want to share with you what the data and what the research shows. And this is a personal point of privilege to acknowledge the work of Mayor Turner. So what the data shows, particularly for you as Black mayors, that Black mayors in our country lead with a community development lens. They center communities in their investments, with their finances, resources, and putting the people that are impacted the most at the heart of that work. And it is evident in Mayor Turner's administration. I believe that once, generations from now, decades from now, case studies will be done on what you led, what you envisioned, what you've implemented, and people will speak to the benefits of what they've benefited from because of decisions that you've made. A couple of decisions that have been made most recently, and I know Director Bynum left, the Director of the Housing and Community Affairs Development Department, but particularly to housing, and I know we're going to speak to some other areas. But at the 7,200 units that were mentioned, but also most recently at the city's budget, allocating an additional $20 million to local drainage projects to address communities that have historically been divested from. When a hurricane comes, they are most impacted, and that was so significant. And we may not see the benefits of that today, but in the next 10 years, people will say that a hurricane came through my neighborhood and I was able to keep my home. I was able to maintain my property because of the drainage, the infrastructure that's happening. I'm sure Director Haddock will speak to that. So I just want to acknowledge you and just give him applause for that work. It is not easy to lead with an equity lens. It's not popular, and oftentimes in the dominant culture, language can be adopted, but the principles are removed. And so equity can become a talking point, and it's something that becomes hip and trendy, but we forget the work that it's required to do and move forward. So I want to go ahead and let's get started. That was my little monologue for you, so we're going to go ahead and get ready to the work. So I have the pleasure of working with some of the best directors in the city, and I'm not biased, and I think this is something that is very accurate. Many people within the mayor's administration and throughout the halls of City Hall, whatever building they're in, they're working tirelessly to make sure that people like you and me and my father and people all across the city have access to what is due to them. To what they ultimately deserve at the base level. So I'm really honored to moderate this conversation. I want to introduce Carol Haddock. She's the director of Houston Public Works, the largest American public works associated accredited agency in the nation. She leads nearly 4,200 employees in transforming the culture and operations of the department, which has an annual operating budget of $2.7 billion and an annual capital budget of over $1 billion. Go ahead and acknowledge her. Y'all better clap, because when your drains need work, you got to get to her, so y'all better give her all of the applause, okay? Next, I want to introduce Director Nicole Irvin. Last year, she was appointed by the mayor to lead his Office of Cultural Affairs, where she serves as the Chief Cultural Policy Advisor to the mayor. She's responsible for implementing the city's arts and cultural plan and advocating for Houston's creative community. Let's go ahead and acknowledge her. She does a phenomenal job. Last and definitely not least, Director Kenneth Allen. He was appointed as Director of the Houston Parks and Recreation Department in 2021 by Mayor Turner, and he comes with 36 years of professional experience in the park and recreation field, having worked in the Parks Department for over 28 years. With the last 11, I don't have my notes, but with the last 11, he was doing a good job, okay? Go ahead. I'm sure. So I want to go ahead and get started, and I teach introduction community development at Prairie View, so I'm going to open this panel discussion with the one question I offer to all of my students. How much does it cost to invest in a neighborhood before that neighborhood reaches its tipping point and starts to generate wealth and equity on its own? How much? That's not a question you're going to answer today, because my students never get it. They never get to answer that. But that's something I want you to ponder when they're talking about their areas. How much is the commitment we must make to our infrastructure, right? We can't talk about housing before we make sure that the drains are available and that they're all working together. We can't talk about an economy without making sure our artists, our creative community has a space in that, and the things that we boast about in our city are sustained. We can't talk about investing in neighborhoods without talking about quality of life and how important our parks to us. So our parks are to our city. So I want to open with that question, and then to you to ponder on how much does it take before a neighborhood starts to regenerate on its own. And then I want to open up with some questions. And Director Haddock, I want to start with you. You know, it is known that Houston we've had 7 federally declared disasters. And so Mayor Turner, not only has he been turning the ship on equity, but he's also been making sure that we can stay in place and that we can replace the units of housing that was lost, that we can make sure that simple drainage projects happen, capital improvement projects. So with you, when you hear the word equity, can you speak directly to some of the directions you've taken as director in Houston Public Works in terms of strategies and some of the results that have come from that?
So good, this is on. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for allowing me the privilege of being sitting on this stage and chatting with you this morning. It is a journey. I will tell you that every day in this job I learn something new. And what I know today is very different than what I knew 5 years ago, particularly in light of how we began to even just talk about some of these topics. and begin to understand the legacy of what we at Houston Public Works, what we at the City of Houston, at the state, at the federal level, have done policy-wise that has resulted in where we are today. Because our investments match our policy, and they historically have done that. So when you ask on what we've done, first off, I want to acknowledge Dr. Potter and say thanks for bursting my bubble. I'm excited about that score, but reminding us that you know that equity in a not good quality infrastructure is not the right answer. Our purpose at Houston Public Works is together we create a strong foundation for Houston to thrive. And it is aspirational, but it is also deliberate. We recognize that we are not yet that strong foundation. We're responsible for the infrastructure, for the things that Houstonians, our community depend on every single day. Our water, our wastewater, our streets, our storm drainage, and the permitting of those structures that we live, work, and play in and around, making sure that they're safe for their purposes. And so when you ask me what it is that we've done, I will say that over the last 5 years, I've continued to be challenged on a daily basis, and I will use the roadside ditches as the example. It was not too long ago, and unfortunately I will say it was not too long ago, it wasn't 5 years ago, that I was in the mayor's office and I made the comment, I feel like you're holding me accountable for things that are on the ground from before I was in this position, from before I was in this career, from before I was on this earth. And the response I got was, I am. And that took me back a little bit. I was like, what? And the reason I say that is the roadside ditches is a perfect example of that. The roadside ditches in and of themselves are not bad. They're not inferior infrastructure by themselves. In fact, many areas of town we embrace and love, and they filter stormwater. They do many good things for the community. But where roadside ditches aren't good is when they prevent us from having adequate sidewalks and transportation infrastructure, and when they prevent us because they're too deep and they put a burden on the community for maintaining those ditches that is not, you know, I mow out to the edge of, well, actually I don't, I used to. I mow out to the edge of my curb, but it's a flat area. And so those roadside ditches actually do create inequities in how we put burdens on the community. And so when we had this conversation, and Mayor Turner recently pushed back on us and said, why shouldn't we do these things? And I'll be honest with you, our department was like, well, we should, but we haven't had the funding. And so the question becomes, how do we get creative? How do we find these different things? And in this case, he came to us and said, I'm willing to take some of the general fund surplus, and you need to match it. Yeah. And so we took some of our funding and agreed to match that to do a catch-up. And then to transfer that relationship with the community such that we are taking back on some of those responsibilities that had, through cut budgets and through, you know, we pulled those off the table. And that was not the right answer. And so we are one step at a time tackling each of those issues and taking them forward. But I will tell you, if we hadn't been challenged with that question, I'm not sure my department would have on its own stood up and done that. And so my challenge is, how do we look at every single thing we're responsible for and not need a Mayor Turner to ask me the question? How do we look at each one of those things and say, how do we find these where we have inequitable outcomes because of our long-term practices and policies, and how do we right that ship and not need, I love Mayor Turner, but not need him sitting there to challenge us to do the right thing.
And that's good. And I want to stay there, but I want to pivot to Director Allen. But I think there's an important point that Director hadn't mentioned. She said that she's still learning There's some things that when she got in this position because she's trained in this role, but as the city grows, our learning changes. And for many of us in this room, we do this work, we're close to it, we have proximity, or this is our introduction to this work. And I think we always have to keep in front of us our own instinct, right? That we shouldn't have to be instructed to do this work. We should have instinct for this work. When we see something, we should say something. We should offer up an alternative to what we're already seeing. So I think you raise a good point, and it's a reminder for all of us. To that point, Director Allen, how can collaborations and partnerships, and Mayor Turner alluded to that, right? It wasn't that the city invested in that park. It's that he had the instinct to know that if we invest in this park on the north side, if we put in the resources on this north side, it will yield forevermore, and it has. So what collaborations and partnerships have you envisioned and you are envisioning, because you have a limited budget as well? So you have to make brick without straw at times. But yet there's such a high demand on the resource that you manage. Can you talk about how the Parks Department is leading in that area?
Certainly. Thank you guys. Thank everybody for being here. It's such an important topic. When you think about parks and equity, parks are special places that people can go to in times of leisure, in times of relaxation, in times of peace. It's a neutral ground. And so equity is one of the key things that we've been focusing on in multiple areas. In terms of collaboration, just the directors in this room internally, when you think about public works, access to parks, in terms of our entry sidewalks, curbs, we've worked on multiple projects internally. You talk about Director Nicole Irvin and art. Do we have art displayed across the city, especially in neighborhoods that need it most? So kids can envision, that whole process about art and culture. And many other directors in this room we partnered with just to get things done in under-resourced and underserved communities. When you think about libraries, when you think about the Department of Neighborhoods and dumping, when you think about solid waste, all of the projects that we've been privileged to work on, I've been able to work internally with our partners. Our mayor has charged us to actually do that. And then when you think about external partners, I call external partners all the nonprofits, all the conservancies, all the parks boards, all the entities that support our profession. You have the National Recreation and Parks Association. In terms of equity, it's one of the key pillars of existing as a park system. So just not thinking about internally, but externally, we're able to do some amazing things that impact parks across the city. The mayor mentioned over 350 parks. I'm going to give you an exact number, 383, over 640 miles of acreage. We maintain 40,000 acres of land throughout the city. No way we can do what we're currently doing without partnerships. One of the major things that we've hit, we have actually completed 21 parks in the 10 complete communities over time. We'll have 22, we'll have another 2 completed this month, Ms. Bugs. So, but it's just the collaborations, internal and external, which extends our service and our opportunities in delivering equity across the city.
Sure. And really good point, and I also want to highlight the Alief Neighborhood Center. For y'all who may not know, it's a phenomenal center. Director Lawson, where is she? Oh, she did, but I want to acknowledge your colleagues as well, Director Ray Lawson with the Houston Public Library, Director Stephen Williams with the Houston Health Department. All of them had the instinct to invest in neighborhood and dedicated dollars from their accounts to invest in a phenomenal footprint on the west side of town. So if you haven't been there, definitely get there. To your point about the external relationships, 383 parks is significant. And parks essentially belong to the people and community, right? So what's the call of action for individuals? How do people partner with the Parks Department? What's our responsibility to making sure that those assets are maintained in our community? Because there's a lot of responsibility in managing 40,000 acres of green space.
Most definitely. we have forums and we have opportunities for the community to speak to us in terms of advisory councils, in terms of civic clubs, super neighborhoods, surveys that we send out. We listen to the community. The nonprofit arm is a major part of that in terms of community engagement. So where there's opportunities for us to listen to communities, whether it's city council, whether it's a survey, whether it's a nonprofit group, we entertain and encourage meetings so that we can discuss each area. Some of the things that we're going through just in A-Leaf alone, a great facility, a cultural melting pot. You have some specific unique challenges as you operate a facility of that magnitude in a neighborhood that need it most. Well, we have several, I would call them challenges that the community is bringing to us. So we sit down, we listen to those challenges, and we work together to make things better. We have studies that are done with other organizations that highlight equity scores, other imbalances in terms of parkland. That's another way that we're able to just take this information, process it, and develop an action plan to address the shortcomings, especially in neighborhood parks.
Sure. And we need a lot of hands on deck for that. And I would just offer that Friends of Parks is a wonderful opportunity to do that. So although you may be in this work and you have a neighborhood park in your community and you're probably always asking, someone should be picking up that trash. They need to buy a new sign for that park. They need to add new lighting. That person is you. And so that person is you. That person is you and your neighbor and the other person that is calling to complain. And there's a wonderful way to funnel that energy and effort to supplement the work that's happening at the department level. Is to advocate and have it Friends of Parks. There is no better investment in making sure and taking ownership of the asset that gives back to you, and especially during the pandemic when parks were such a huge resource for our communities for mental health and for getting out of the house and just, calming ourselves down, and we continue to see the high activity. So I want to encourage all of you and our interns that are in the room that you too can take role in your active community by participating with Friends of Parks. I want to pivot to Director Irvin because, oftentimes Houston is noted as having one of the best cultural cities. We have more seats in, theater seats than New York. We are always talking about our museums and the plays, but there is an entire community of artists and an entire creative community that often doesn't get the same attention. Can you talk about how, in your recent role as director, how you've been able to underscore and really amplify a lot of these artists into the work of the city?
Sure, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Director Buggs, for including me in this panel. It's pretty phenomenal when we think about, so I'm sitting here next to Director Haddock. She talked about the billions in investment and that infrastructure that we think about on a daily basis. And then on my other side, we have Director Allen and his 40,000 acres of land. And so someone might say, and the arts. What's going on here? What's happening? Well, I say yes, and the arts, right? Yes, and the arts. When we talk about the creative economy, it is an economy. When we talk about Houston, we talk about the arts, right? Mayor Turner talks about it's a part of our DNA. Right? When you think about creativity and imagination and the possibility for children, for youth, the arts are a spark. They are an entry point, right? When we talk about the arts and education, it helps us, it helps our students to achieve, to advance. When students can go to a field trip, they see beyond themselves, right? They see possibilities. When we talk about the arts, we talk about what we see in spaces. We might see a statue that looks like us. We might see something that talks about the history of our space and place. When we talk about the arts, we talk about people. We talk about creatives that do work on a daily basis. And so often when we talk about artists and creatives, we talk about what they provide for us. We talk about their product, right? That we've seen this beautiful painting or we went to this amazing play. But these are individuals who are practicing their profession. And that profession is a skill set that they have informed themselves in, and that they are creating not just for themselves, but for us and into our economy, right? So that's that painter, that's that art teacher, that's that musician. The diversity of artists, I could go on, so we'll stop there. And I really wanted to lift up something that Director Haddock said, right? So the mayor held her accountable for things that have been happening generationally. And so when I came into this space, the Office of Cultural Affairs is new. We had a arts and culture plan that was adopted in 2015, the very end. And when Mayor Turner came into office, he said, we're implementing this plan. And that plan had 27 areas that community said we need to focus on. And one of them was that we want a fair and equitable system in which our grants are distributed.
Yeah.
A fair and equitable system. And so we got to work in doing that, because we said we can't just look at what the outcomes are. We have to look at the system, right? We saw that when we looked across zip codes, activities, activations, art were in few zip codes. But it did not cover the entire community of Houston. And so when we're talking about public dollars, how do we make sure we are using those dollars for all residents? And so we changed the system. That change brought about a little bit of change in reality, so that neighborhoods actually started seeing things happening in their community that was funded by the city. But that change in system was a step, right? It was a step that moves us along this journey. Yesterday, I heard someone talk about being in a tug of war, and it hit me really viscerally, because we can all be pulling toward equity. But if we're not pulling in the same direction, we are not going to win. And data helps us to know the direction that we need to pull in. And it helps us to know whether or not we're in the front at the tug of war, or we're in the back, right? And I say for the arts and culture ecosystem, we're still in the front. There is a lot of work to do in our system. What we are seeing, so you'll see in the access and inclusion section, arts is there, and our number is extremely high, right? And it doesn't speak to quality. Thank you so much. But that number is high because we began looking at data of where public dollars were going in zip codes. And we changed the system, and so we now have more public dollars that are going into more zip codes. But that again is an initial step.
And I appreciate you speaking to that. And to me, I consider that instinct, to be able to lift that information from the data and take that report and say, this is how we're going to redesign a new system. And I think particularly when we look at our complete communities, and I represent and live in Alief, and many of the individuals that are creative geniuses don't even consider themselves an artist. So when we put out those calls and those RFPs for them to apply, they don't even see themselves being a part of our creative economy. And I think there's more work that we have to do with individuals seeing themselves in that vision, seeing themselves as a partner in our creative economy. And what a great example, again, I'll point to the Alief Community Center, and you can also point to the hallway where you see images of people that have walked this community, spent time in the center. They have stories, they have connection, there's heritage here. All of that is from our creative economy. And I think we have to do a better job of making sure that people can fully participate and feel seen in the work and the dollars that we do. I do know that I am limited on time, so I want to offer this question to all three. so you can share with all of us your plans. And hopefully this is, again, a reminder to many of you that are a part of this work. And I do want to shout out Shell again for underwriting this. It's not easy to do hard things, and putting your brand next to the city and also around this work is extremely important. So I want to acknowledge that as well. So in final remarks for each of you, in what ways can the study contribute to ongoing conversations and initiatives? Like, as we look forward, how can we get real focused on this and move it from just having a conversation, but building an infrastructure and having long-term impact?
So I'll jump in and start. So one of the things that we have used over the last decade, a little more than a decade, on infrastructure, on our capital improvement plan, was citywide data on the condition and the capacity of that infrastructure. And the data was as good as the data was, but it was not the complete picture. We didn't have this data on equity, and I know that we're not there yet, that we've started, but there's a lot more data than there was. And so we need to commit to reviewing how we create that data-driven recommendations for where we're going to be investing to include this data from the equity from the equity study. Make sure that we are including that when we're looking. And one of the things that I want to tie this to, and Mayor Turner, you did this you took us to outcomes-based budgeting.
Yeah.
We need to be looking at outcomes-based capital improvement planning. What is the outcome that we're seeking, as opposed to what is the input that's driving us? And when we start looking at those outcomes, this equity data is going to clearly define a path for us of where we should be investing these large capital dollars.
That's good.
I'll jump in next. You know, when you think about equity and the needs across the city, you know, this study, along with others, are where we can collect this data and act on it. It's really important when you think about our tree canopy across the city.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's tools that we can use in GSI mapping that will give us a complete picture on where we are in terms of, you know, affluent communities, less affluent communities, and things that we can do, like with our partners. You know, Apache, every year we have an Arbor Day, and guess what? They're putting down thousands of trees in underserved communities. I believe it's over 25,000 trees in Houston over a period of time, over 100,000 throughout the country. Well, actually, it's over 4 million throughout the country that they've put in underserved communities. So I think just using the data, continue to partner internal and external, and using research to help us determine where we should go, and how we get there becomes a day-to-day process from an equity standpoint. Meeting with partners and the community, tapping into resources beyond our budget. Thank you, Shell, once again. You're an example for other companies to follow.
Yeah.
You know, and then our adoption process in terms of trees, esplanades, and parks, and that community input as a tactical tool to reach beyond what we can with our current resources. You know, volunteerism is paramount across our industry. So forums like this and a public campaign on where we need this help to address equity and other issues, there's plenty of people. The number one reason why people don't get involved is because you don't ask them.
Right.
So based on this forum, everybody in this room and anybody listening, invest in our city and underserved neighborhoods by volunteering, adopting a part, giving us input. So those are simple ways to address.
I'm going to encourage folks in this room, folks listening, and all residents to demand services.
Yeah.
Ask us, what are we doing in this space? How are we using our public dollars in your neighborhood and your community? Right? So we are gathering data. We have plans. We have reports. How do we make sure that they don't sit on the shelf, but they are a part of our daily strategy and our operations. We made a commitment around civic art, so the art that you see in public spaces. We looked at what was in the city's collection. The city of Houston owns over 800 works of art. You see it in our airports, you see it at the convention center, in our libraries, and our parks, all over the city. We looked at, we said we want to look and see who's in our collection. What artists are there? What mediums are there? And what stories are being told? And we said we're going to commit to looking at this on an annual basis, so as we make changes in our process, we want folks to hold us accountable so that the collection begins to look more like Houston.
This
I'm
is
sorry,
very- Go
one
ahead,
more
go ahead,
comment.
go ahead.
I'm sorry. In terms of one critical strategy that was passed by ordinance, our Nature Preserve Ordinance. 26 parks, 7,000 acres of land protected for generations to come. Preserving what we have along with enhancing it. That Nature Preserve Ordinance will positively impact generations to come.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and give our panelists a round of applause. So I heard three things in conclusion, which is a call to action, and hopefully just reminders, because all of us in this room, we're doing this work and we're deeply committed to having the city of Houston that we all deserve. Number one, we need to lead with data-informed outcomes, right? How we do our infrastructure, how we invest in housing, how we even craft ordinances, right? It's led with data and information around equity. Number two, demand it. As Houstonians, we live here, we work here, we're raising our children here, and we deserve to have safe streets. We deserve to send our kids to the park and play and know that they're going to come home safely when the lights come on. We deserve to know that when it rains, that we don't have to evacuate our home. We deserve to have all of those things when we get up in age and we may need assistance with walking. We can walk down the sidewalk because we have ADA compliant ramps. Very simple things in our community, so start demanding it because it's what you deserve. And then lastly, I think you said everything, right? Did I say everything? Okay, and so the other piece with that is that this work is not done. This is just the beginning. The conversation and the data that was shared with us today proves to us that no matter if you are elected, an appointed public official, the mayor of the city, a corporate sponsor, we all have work and a responsibility in this. So hopefully this is the beginning of a series of not just conversations, but actions. And again, in the next 10, 20 years, we'll be able to point to the genesis of this work and how our city has transformed. Thank you all for allowing me to moderate, and I'll bring back up our hostess with the mostest, Director Shannon Buggs.